What would you do if you boarded a flight, only to be told you didn't belong there? Two teenage sisters, Amara and Naomi Johnson, stepped onto a plane expecting nothing more than a long ride home. But what followed was a night of humiliation, confrontation, and a fight for dignity that no one on board would ever forget. A flight attendant's decision spiraled into chaos. Security was called. Arguments erupted. And yet, in the middle of it all, these two young women refused to break. Calm yet unyielding, steady even as the world tried to strip them of their worth. Amara and Naomi turned the cabin of that aircraft into a stage where justice itself was on trial. But here's the question. Can dignity survive when prejudice has already taken flight? And when the plane finally lands, who truly walks away, change the victims, the aggressors, or everyone watching tonight? We unfold the story of turbulence that shook far more than an airplane. Stay with us, because every moment of this journey will leave you questioning what it means to stand firm in the face of injustice. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss the stories that reveal truth, resilience, and humanity. The soft hum of engines filled the cabin as Atlantic Skyways Flight 297 prepared for departure from Washington, D.C., bound for Los Angeles. First class glowed in muted gold, leather seats arranged with perfect symmetry, passengers settling in with the practiced ease of seasoned travelers. For many, it was just another flight, but for Amara and Naomi Johnson, twin sisters only 16 years old, the air felt heavy with expectation. Amara sat by the window, her book open on her lap, but her eyes weren't moving across the page. She had always loved reading during flights. It calmed her nerves, gave her a sense of order while the world sped by 35,000 feet below. But this time, she wasn't sure she could concentrate. Naomi, beside her, sipped orange juice through a straw and scrolled through her phone, humming quietly to herself. Her energy was different, lighter, more restless, like a spark waiting to catch fire. The first-class cabin was far from full. A few business travelers already had laptops open, typing furiously as if the plane were just an extension of their office. A couple near the front whispered to each other, pointing out celebrities they thought they saw during boarding. Everyone seemed preoccupied, each lost in their own bubble of comfort. Everyone, except for the flight attendant. Clara Reynolds moved briskly down the aisle, her smile thin, her eyes quick to scan. She was in her late 30s, perfectly groomed, her blonde hair swept into a neat bun. To the casual observer, she might have looked professional, efficient even. But there was something in the way her gaze lingered on Amara and Naomi that gave the sisters pause. Clara stopped at row 2, seats 2A and 2B. Amara and Naomi's seats. "I don't know how you girls managed to sneak in here," Clara said, her voice pitched just loud enough for others to overhear. She didn't smile this time. Instead, she raised her eyebrows as if daring them to explain themselves. "But this ends now." Naomi's straw froze mid-sip. Amara looked up slowly from her book, meeting Clara's stare without flinching. Around them, heads began to turn. Business travelers paused in their typing. A woman across the aisle leaned forward, sensing something was off. Clara's performance wasn't private. It was designed to be seen. These seats," Clara continued, gesturing dramatically, "are for paying passengers, not charity cases." The words hung in the air like a slap. Naomi felt her cheeks burn. She wanted to snap back, to tell Clara exactly how wrong she was, but Amara, always the steadier of the two, placed a hand lightly on her sister's arm. Her voice was calm, steady. "Ma'am, here's my boarding pass," she said. pulling the slip of paper from her purse and offering it with both hands. Seat 2A. Purchased weeks ago. Clara snatched the boarding pass with the suspicion of a detective examining counterfeit bills. She turned it over, held it up to the light, her lips pursed in disbelief. Finally, she let out a short, incredulous laugh. This has to be fake. There's no way you girls can afford first class. She waved the ticket dismissively. Probably printed this at home. Naomi's pulse quickened. She had heard stories like this before. Stories whispered by cousins and classmates about being challenged in stores, followed in malls, questioned at airports. But she had never expected it to happen to her. Not like this. Not in front of so many people. She felt her fingers tighten around her phone, instinctively. She opened Instagram and pressed the Go Live button. The screen blinked. Then the small number appeared in the corner, 17 viewers. 24. 39. Her voice trembled, but she steadied it. "Excuse me," she said. Her phone angled slightly upward to catch Clara's face. "What's your name? I want to make sure I get this right for the video." Clara's eyes narrowed. "Put that away. No filming on my aircraft." Her voice rose, sharper now, more commanding. But Naomi didn't stop. She kept her phone steady, her breathing even. "This is live," Naomi murmured under her breath, almost as if reassuring herself. "People are watching." Amara glanced sideways at her sister, a flicker of conflict in her eyes. Was this the right move? Should they be quiet, hope it ended quickly, or should they stand their ground, risk whatever storm might follow? Her father's words echoed in her memory. Dignity is not something others can grant you. It's something you protect. Clara pressed her call button, her movements sharp, annoyed. "Janet, I need you in first class immediately," she said into the intercom. "We have a situation." Passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A businessman 2 rows back raised his eyebrows at his neighbor. The woman across the aisle tapped her husband on the shoulder, whispering something he couldn't quite hear. A couple of passengers began pulling out their own phones, curious, cautious. Naomi's livestream count ticked upward. 78 viewers, 115, 209. Comments began to scroll. What's going on? Are they being harassed? This doesn't look right. A wave of unease rolled through the cabin. People sensed they were witnessing something more than a seating dispute. Something uglier. Something that wasn't supposed to happen in the glow of first class. And Amara knew, deep down, this was only the beginning. Neither she nor Naomi could have predicted that this small confrontation, this single moment of doubt cast on their right to sit where they belonged, would unravel an airline within hours. Neither of them could have known that before the plane touched down. Their story would be broadcast to tens of thousands, reshaping not just their flight, but an entire industry. But sitting there, under the sharp gaze of Clara Reynolds, Amara only thought of one thing. Stay calm, hold steady. Don't give them what they expect. The hum of the engines deepened. The cabin doors sealed. Flight 227 was ready to depart. But for Amara and Naomi Johnson, the journey was only just beginning. The seatbelt sign had not even flicked on when the tension in row 2 grew unbearable. Clara Reynolds stood like a judge in a courtroom, boarding pass still pinched between her manicured fingers, her eyes narrowing at the 2 sisters as if their very presence was an offense. Passengers nearby shifted in their seats. A man in 3A pulled his headphones down, pretending to adjust them while leaning closer. A woman across the aisle glanced nervously at her husband, her lips forming a silent question he could not answer. It was as if everyone sensed this was about to become something larger than a simple misunderstanding. Naomi's phone was tilted just right, capturing Clara's frown. The live counter on the screen crept past 300. Comments scrolled quickly now. This is discrimination. Are they serious? Check the ticket. Stay strong. Girl. Amara tried to keep her breathing steady. She had rehearsed moments like this in her head before, because her father had always insisted that preparation mattered. What if a teacher accused you unfairly? What if a store clerk followed you too closely? His lessons had always ended with the same advice: remain calm. Gather evidence. Never let anger speak louder than your truth. She took her ticket back from Clara, folded it neatly, and placed it on her tray table. Her voice was quiet but strong. Ma'am, this is my seat. I'm not moving. Clara's lips curved into something between a smirk and a sneer. We'll see about that. Within moments, the gate supervisor arrived. Margaret Hale walked briskly down the aisle, her expression already hardened into annoyance. She was in her 50s, with the air of someone who had worked too many years in the same uniform and believed she had seen it all. What's going on here? Margaret asked. Her tone clipped. Clara wasted no time. These girls are sitting in first class with fake tickets. I'm sure of it. The word fake carried a sting that rippled through the cabin. Some passengers frowned. Others raised their phones higher, angling for a better view. Margaret didn't ask to see the boarding passes. She didn't pull up the reservation system. She simply gave Amara and Naomi a long, assessing look, and then made her judgment. Girls, you need to move to your actual seats, she said briskly. We're holding up departure. Naomi leaned closer to her sister, whispering. She didn't even look. She just decided. Amara's stomach tightened. She wanted to scream, to demand fairness, but she steadied herself. Instead, she lifted her ticket again and held it out with steady hands. Seat 2A, she repeated. Purchased under my name. My sister's is 2B. Margaret sighed as if she were tired of the game. Security will need to handle this. She gestured to Clara. Call them in. Clara pressed the intercom button again, her voice carrying an edge of satisfaction. Security, please report to first class immediately. We have a situation. The words situation and security seemed to charge the air. The hum of conversations rose. Phones were everywhere now. Little glowing rectangles recording every twitch, every glare. Naomi's livestream number ticked past 700. Amara felt her throat tighten. She had always known that her composure would be tested someday, but never imagined it would be here, on a plane full of strangers, with her sister beside her. Maybe we should just go, Naomi whispered, her voice low but heavy. They're not listening. What if they drag us out? What if Amara shook her head gently? If we move, we're saying they're right. We didn't do anything wrong. Her sister's eyes filled with conflicting emotions. Fear, pride, defiance. Naomi clutched her phone tighter. The comments section exploded. Don't leave. Stand your ground, girl. Keep recording. This is going viral. The minutes dragged. The passengers who had been silent began to stir. A businessman in seat 3B closed his laptop with a snap. His voice carried forward. Excuse me, he said firmly, addressing Margaret. I saw their tickets. They were first class. Why don't you just check the system instead of wasting everyone's time? Head swiveled. It was the first open challenge to the crew. Clara bristled immediately. Sir, please return to your seat. This doesn't concern you. But the man didn't sit down. Discrimination concerns everyone, he said sharply. His voice had the authority of someone who had spent years in boardrooms and negotiations. I run a diversity consulting firm. I know bias when I see it. A murmur rippled through the cabin. Some passengers nodded. A few clapped quietly. Clara flushed, her jaw tightening. Before anyone could respond, a voice rang out from the front. An elderly woman with silver hair stood, leaning slightly on her cane. Her presence commanded respect even before she spoke. "My name is Judge Eleanor Briggs," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "I have served in federal courts for 30 years. I am watching this very closely, and I can confirm these young ladies have shown valid boarding passes. This treatment is unacceptable." The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret shifted uneasily, her authority suddenly fragile, but she forced her voice to remain cold. "Judge or not, this is a matter of protocol. Security is already on the way." Naomi's livestream counter surged. Over 1,200 viewers now. Comments blurred across the screen, furious and fast. "This is insane. Federal judge in the cabin and they still won't listen. Call the news." Amara's hands trembled slightly, hidden under the tray table. She wanted to believe justice would prevail simply because truth was on her side. But the weight of the eyes around her, the looming shadow of security, made her wonder if dignity was enough against a system determined to dismiss her. Naomi whispered again, her tone urgent. "Amma, they're going to drag us out." Amara inhaled slowly, willing her heartbeat to slow. She met her sister's eyes and spoke words their father had drilled into them. "Stay calm. Keep recording. The truth is our protection," as if summoned by those very words. The cabin door opened and a tall man in a security uniform stepped in. His badge glinted under the overhead lights. Officer Daniel Brooks. His stride was deliberate, his face already set in the lines of authority. The cabin grew quiet. Phones tilted upward. The livestream counter shot past 500. "What's the problem here?" Brooks asked, though his eyes were already fixed on the sisters. "Unauthorized passengers in first class," Margaret said quickly. "We believe the tickets are forged." Naomi's phone vibrated with a flood of comments. "They didn't even check forgery. Really, this is racial profiling." Brooks crossed his arms, his posture radiating finality. "All right, ladies, I'm going to need you to move to coach, or we'll have to escort you off the aircraft." The words hit Amara like cold water. She felt a lump rise in her throat, but she swallowed it down. This wasn't the moment for fear. This was the moment to hold the line. "Sir," she said evenly, "would you like to see our boarding passes or check the airline system? We're happy to comply with verification." But Brooks barely glanced at her. "Ma'am, please don't argue. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." The tension in the cabin crackled. Naomi raised her phone higher. Her livestream counter flashed 1-823. The comments were relentless. "Don't move. Show the ticket again. This is about to blow up." For Amara, the world seemed to narrow to a pinpoint. The sound of engines, the weight of stairs, the heat of injustice pressing in. Her palms were damp, her pulse hammered. For a split second, she imagined standing, quietly walking back to coach, ending the scene. But another image rose stronger, the look in Naomi's eyes, the knowledge that if they surrendered now, they would carry that surrender forever. She sat back in her seat, spine straight, voice steady. "No, sir," she said softly. "We are not moving." The cabin exhaled as if holding its collective breath. Naomi's phone buzzed violently, the screen a blur of comments. The number jumped past 2 alarms. And though Amara could not know it yet, those words, those 4 simple words, were the spark that would ignite everything. The quiet tension in the first-class cabin was now thick enough to press against the skin. Every flicker of light, every shuffle of movement felt amplified. Amara could hear her own heartbeat, steady but heavy, like the ticking of a clock counting down towards something inevitable. Officer Daniel Brooks stood rigidly in the aisle, his arms crossed. His presence meant to project control. But instead of calming the cabin, it only fueled the unease. The sisters sat in their seats, small against the wide leather cushions, but their stillness radiated a kind of power that unnerved him. "Ladies," Brooks repeated, his voice firmer, "this is your last chance. Move to your actual seats, or we'll have to escort you off this aircraft." Naomi's phone tilted slightly, catching the officer's face. The live viewer count flashed on screen 2, 421. Comments blurred upward in a furious stream. They didn't even check the system. This officer didn't ask for ID. "Stay calm. Girls, we're with you." Margaret Hale, standing just behind Clara, folded her arms across her chest, a look of satisfaction crossing her face. She had dealt with difficult passengers before, but this felt different. These girls weren't yelling or cursing. They weren't belligerent. Their calm made her feel exposed, like the more they remained composed, the more her actions looked unjust. Still, her pride refused to bend. "Officer, please remove them so we can depart. They've disrupted this flight long enough." The words "disrupted this flight" stung Amara. She had done nothing but sit quietly in her seat, the seat her father had purchased weeks ago. Her jaw clenched. She wanted to speak, to argue, to force them to listen. But she remembered her father's advice again. Sometimes silence is the loudest protest. Naomi, however, was less restrained. She raised her voice just enough for her livestream to catch. "You're accusing us without proof. Why won't you check the computer system? Why won't you even scan the tickets again?" Clara shot her a sharp glare. "Put that phone away or we'll confiscate it." Naomi's grip tightened. She thought of turning it off, of protecting herself from further confrontation. But then the thought hit her: if she stopped recording, their story would vanish the way so many stories of bias did, erased or twisted until no one believed them. Her thumb brushed against the corner of the screen. The viewer count had leapt to 3,000. Comments flooded in. "Do not stop recording. This is going viral. Someone tagged the news stations." The energy in the cabin shifted again. Passengers who had been quietly watching were now leaning forward, openly filming. The businessman, Victor Chen's phone was angled directly at Clara and Margaret. Judge Briggs sat tall, her expression severe, her phone now in her lap, as if ready to capture her own statement if needed. Amara's chest tightened with the weight of the moment. She could feel Naomi trembling beside her, not from fear exactly, but from the electric charge of adrenaline. It would have been so easy to cave, to stand and walk back to coach, to let the humiliation wash over them quietly. But something in her refused. Officer Brooks reached for his radio. His voice clipped. "Control. This is Brooks. Situation in first class. Passengers refusing to comply. Requesting additional support." The words "passengers refusing to comply" were a knife twist. Amara felt her cheeks flush. They were complying. They had done everything asked, produced tickets, stayed calm, answered questions, and yet the narrative being broadcast through that radio was already rewriting reality. Naomi's live stream pinged again. The counter now read 4102. A new wave of comments scrolled. "Wow. Refusing to comply. Sitting in the seat they paid for. This is insane. Keep recording. I'm screen recording this. Don't worry, it won't disappear." Margaret leaned closer to Clara, whispering, though her words carried far enough for nearby passengers to hear, "We should have shut this down earlier. Now everyone's making a spectacle out of nothing." The word nothing sent a jolt through Amara. She swallowed hard. Were they nothing? Was their dignity, their presence, their truth, nothing to these women? Her hands trembled slightly as she pressed them together in her lap. Stay calm. Breathe. She glanced at Naomi, whose jaw was tight, eyes flashing. The younger twin's voice was almost a whisper, but it carried a blade's edge. If they want a spectacle, they'll get one. Dad always said sunlight is the best disinfectant. The cabin door opened again. A new figure stepped inside, the insignia on his uniform marking him as airport police. Lieutenant Harris Monroe, tall and imposing, his hair clipped close, his presence instantly commanding. He surveyed the cabin quickly, his gaze settling on the sisters as though the decision had already been made. "What's the situation?" Monroe asked, his tone brusque. Brooks answered immediately. 2 juveniles refusing to comply. Seated in first class without valid authorization. Naomi let out a sharp breath. "That's not true. Our tickets are right here." She held them up, her phone still broadcasting. The tickets shook slightly in her trembling hands, but her voice was steady. Monroe barely glanced at the slips of paper. His eyes hardened. "Ladies, you've got one last chance. Move to coach or face arrest for trespassing." The word arrest hit the cabin like thunder. Gasps echoed. Several passengers raised their phones higher. Judge Briggs stood again, her cane thumping lightly against the floor. "This is outrageous," she declared. "I have watched this entire interaction. These girls have been nothing but polite and compliant. This is blatant discrimination." Victor Chen added his voice, strong and unyielding. "I will personally testify to their innocence. You're creating liability for this airline that you cannot even begin to imagine." But the officers didn't look at them. They only looked at Amara and Naomi. Naomi's livestream counter exploded. 5203, 6, 114, 7009. Comments poured like a flood. "This is national news now. Someone tagged CNN. They're going to regret this." Amara's throat tightened. Fear coiled in her stomach, sharp and cold. For the first time, doubt pierced her composure. What if they actually arrest us? What if Naomi gets hurt? What if Dad finds out too late? Her hands shook. She clenched them tightly together, forcing herself back into stillness. She closed her eyes for a moment, whispering to herself where only Naomi could hear. "We're not criminals. We're not trespassers. We belong here." Naomi turned her phone to capture her sister's face. The livestream audience erupted with comments of support. "She's so strong. Stay calm. Queen. History in the making." Monroe reached for the zip tie restraints on his belt. The sight made Naomi's stomach drop. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "Amma, they're really going to do it." Amara met her sister's eyes. There was fear in her gaze. Yes, but also steel. She spoke softly, a vow more than a statement. "Then let the world see exactly who they are." The cabin was silent except for the hum of engines and the furious tapping of passengers recording the scene. The officers stood ready. Claire and Margaret waited with smug satisfaction, and Amara and Naomi sat side by side, refusing to move, refusing to bend. In that suspended moment, the weight of centuries of injustice pressed down on their shoulders. And yet, in their stillness, in their refusal to surrender, there was power. The livestream counter blinked again. 802 viewers, and climbing. The storm was far from over. The hum of the engines had become background noise, drowned out by the thrum of tension. Every set of eyes in first class was locked on the scene unfolding in row 2. Some passengers leaned forward. Others sat rigid, Phones raised high, as if the truth could only be captured in pixels before it slipped away. Lieutenant Harris Monroe stood tall, his voice cutting through the air with the kind of authority that was meant to silence. "Ladies, this is your final warning. Move to coach immediately, or you will be escorted off this aircraft in restraints." Naomi's phone shook in her hand, the camera catching Monroe's stern expression, the glint of the zip ties on his belt. Her livestream counter flashed a number that made her stomach flip 9,423 viewers. The comments raced across her screen faster than she could read. "Don't back down. This is racism caught live. Stay strong. We're with you." Her pulse hammered in her ears. For a moment, the thought of giving in whispered to her. Maybe moving back to coach would keep them safe. Maybe it would end the humiliation before it grew worse. But then she looked at Amara. Her sister sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, back straight against the seat. Her face was calm, but Naomi could see the tension in her jaw, the slight tremble of her fingers where they pressed together. Amara was scared, Naomi knew it, but she was holding on to something deeper than fear. "Lieutenant," Amara said quietly, her voice steady, "our tickets are valid. We are not moving." The cabin seemed to inhale collectively. Judge Briggs shifted her weight forward, her cane steadying her as she stood once again. "This is a disgrace," she said, her voice ringing with the authority of decades spent on the bench. "These girls have complied at every step. You refuse to even check the system. If you arrest them, you are not only violating their rights, you are placing this airline and this airport in grave legal jeopardy." Her words carried weight, her tone brooking no dismissal. Several passengers clapped, the sound startling in the tense cabin. Clara's cheeks flushed crimson. Margaret's lips tightened, but she avoided the judge's piercing gaze. Victor Chen added his voice, clear and resonant. "I will testify as well. I've watched every moment. This is textbook profiling. If you proceed, know that the world is already watching." Naomi's livestream counter blinked. 12,014 viewers. The number grew with every passing second. Comments scrolled faster than her eyes could catch. "Someone call the CEO. This is going viral on Twitter. They can't hide this now." Lieutenant Monroe's jaw tightened. His training told him to maintain control, to never appear weak in front of passengers. But the weight of so many eyes, the cameras flashing, the authoritative voice of a federal judge, all of it chipped at his certainty. Still, his pride held firm. "Ma'am," he said to Judge Briggs, his tone clipped. "With respect, this is a matter of airline protocol, not your courtroom." Briggs raised her chin, eyes narrowing. "Justice is not bound to courtrooms. Lieutenant, it is bound to truth. And truth is sitting in those two seats with boarding passes you refuse to acknowledge." The words struck hard. The cabin erupted in murmurs. A man in the back called out, "She's right. Just scan the tickets." Others echoed, their voices rising in solidarity. The energy shifted from quiet discomfort to open resistance. Naomi's livestream pinged again. 14,892 viewers. Her phone buzzed with notifications as strangers across the internet shared and reshared the stream. Amara felt a flicker of hope, though fear still pressed at her chest. The tide was shifting. People were no longer silent. But she also knew tides could turn violently. One wrong move, one surge of anger, and everything could collapse. She closed her eyes briefly, whispering a silent prayer to steady herself. When she opened them, her gaze met Monroe's. "Sir," she said, her voice low but unwavering, "we are not criminals. We are not trespassers. We belong here. and the whole world knows it now." The words landed like a strike of lightning. The silence that followed was electric. Margaret Hale stepped forward, her voice sharp, trying to reclaim authority. "Enough of this performance. Officer, remove them now." But Monroe hesitated. His hand hovered near the restraints. Yet he did not move. His eyes darted toward the growing wall of passengers filming, the judge's unyielding stare. Victor Chen's phone angled directly at his face. Naomi's livestream counter blinked 17-1. The comments were relentless. "Don't touch them. Cameras everywhere. Don't you dare. This officer is about to ruin his career." The pressure mounted. Claire's voice broke the silence, high and sharp. "They're children. They're lying. Why is this even a debate?" Amara finally turned her gaze on her. Calm but piercing. Her words cut with quiet force. "Children, you saw our tickets. You saw us board properly. The only thing you see when you look at us is skin color." The cabin gasped. Claire's mouth opened, then closed, her face pale. The truth hung heavy in the air, undeniable. Naomi's phone buzzed again. 20 Go3 viewers. Her live stream had taken on a life of its own. From the back of the cabin, a younger woman stood, her phone held high. "I'm posting this right now to Instagram and tagging every news outlet I can. The world deserves to see what's happening here." Her name, as Amara would later learn, was Sophia Martinez. The dam had broken. Voices rose from all corners of the cabin. Some shouted at the officers to stop. Others urged the crew to check the system. Phones lit the space like stars, each one capturing the scene from a different angle. Lieutenant Monroe's face tightened. Authority was slipping through his fingers, and he knew it. His instincts screamed to shut it down, to reassert dominance. But his training whispered caution, the dangers of escalation when so many witnesses stood ready to testify. He lowered his hand from the restraints. "We'll review this," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. The relief that swept through Amara's chest was immediate, but it was not complete. She knew this wasn't over. They had been spared the humiliation of forced removal, but the battle was still raging. Naomi's livestream counter soared again. 23,487. The comments blurred. "Victory. Stay strong. Girls, this airline is finished." For the first time since Clara had accused them, Amara allowed herself a deep breath. She turned to Naomi, her voice barely above a whisper. "You see, the truth always finds light." Naomi's eyes filled, a mix of fear, relief, and fierce pride. She squeezed her sister's hand tightly. But even as the moment settled, Clara's voice rose again, venom laced in every word. "This isn't over. You'll regret this." Amara met her glare calmly. "No, I think it's you who will." The engines roared louder as the plane prepared for takeoff. But for everyone on board Flight 227, the real journey had already begun. And outside the cabin, thousands of viewers were waiting, watching, and ready to amplify the truth. The story was no longer just theirs. It was everyone's. The plane had not yet left the gate, but it felt as if it were already in flight, hurtling not through the skies, but through a storm of human emotion. The confrontation in Row 2 had become something larger than the cabin, larger than the airport, larger than the airline itself. Naomi's phone buzzed wildly in her hand. The livestream counter flashed a number she had never imagined possible. 28,947. The comments streamed in a blur, thousands of strangers lending their voices to a fight that was no longer confined to one plane. This is trending. Major outlets are picking it up. They can't ignore this now. Naomi glanced at her sister, her eyes wide with both fear and exhilaration. Amma, we're live to the world. Everyone's watching. Amara's heart pounded. She had never wanted an audience, never wanted her pain to be put on display. Yet here she was, a symbol against her will, standing on a stage she had never chosen. She inhaled slowly, pressing her trembling hands together. If this is what it takes, then let it be worth something. At the front of the cabin, Clara Reynolds and Margaret Hale whispered in hurried tones. Their faces betrayed the truth. This was slipping out of their control. Clara's once confident smirk was now tight with unease. Margaret's jaw flexed as she chewed over options that seemed fewer with every passing second. Lieutenant Monroe remained planted in the aisle, stiff, his pride wrapped tightly around him like armor. His hand rested near his belt, but he did not reach again for the restraints. He could feel the eyes burning into him, not only from the passengers, but from the invisible millions who would soon see his every move. From somewhere behind them, Sophia Martinez raised her voice. I just posted this. It's already getting reshared thousands of times. My cousin texted me news stations are calling. The ripple of her words moved through the cabin like an electric current. Passengers who had once stayed silent now looked emboldened. Some clapped, others cheered softly. A man in business attire muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear. Good. About time someone held them accountable. Naomi's livestream count surged again, 34 to 20. The screen lit up with comments. I'm tweeting this right now. This is on Facebook Live too. The hashtag is trending. Amara shifted uncomfortably in her seat. The weight of so many eyes pressed on her shoulders. She wanted to be strong for Naomi, for herself, for every young girl who might one day face what she was facing. But inside, a battle raged. What if this makes it worse? What if they punish us after what if the plane never leaves and everyone blames us? Her mind swirled with fears. Yet when she looked at Naomi, still streaming despite trembling hands, Amara felt her resolve steady. They could not undo what had been set in motion. They could only endure. Judge Briggs, still standing firm despite her cane, turned to the officers with fire in her voice. Gentlemen, if you will not act with fairness, then know this your names, your faces. Your actions are being broadcast across the nation. This is not just a matter of protocol anymore. It is a matter of justice. The words echoed through the cabin. Monroe's lips pressed into a thin line. Brooke shifted uneasily. Clara's eyes darted toward the door as though seeking escape. Victor Chen stood again, his phone still in hand. Judge Briggs is right. This is out of your control. Every second you hesitate, every refusal to check the system, makes it worse. De-escalate now before this airline is destroyed in court and in public opinion. Naomi's livestream counter surged 4103. The comments roared, Where's the CEO? This airline is done. Protect those girls. For a moment, the cabin seemed to tilt. The power dynamics were shifting, subtle but undeniable. No longer was it the crew dictating terms. Now it was the passengers, the viewers, the voices of thousands pressing back against authority. Amara leaned closer to Naomi, her voice a whisper. You're brave. You know that Naomi's lips quivered into a small, shaky smile. I'm just scared. But maybe if enough people see, they'll have to change. Amara nodded softly. Then let them see. Margaret Hale finally snapped, her composure cracking. This is unacceptable. We cannot let passengers dictate protocol. If we give in now, we lose all control. Her words struck the cabin like sparks against dry grass. A passenger from the back shouted, Control, you never had it. You lost it when you treated them unfairly. Another chimed in, We're not blind. We know what's happening here. Phones rose higher. Cameras clicked. Every second was documented. Naomi's live stream counter blinked again. 46:12. Lieutenant Monroe's radio crackled at his side. A voice from dispatch came through, muffled but urgent. "Lieutenant, be advised. Situation is trending nationally. Upper command is monitoring. Exercise caution." Monroe's hand tightened around the device. His jaw flexed. Authority was his foundation. Yet here it was, crumbling beneath him. He felt exposed, like a performer caught mid-mistake on the largest stage imaginable. For Amara, the moment stretched endlessly. Her body ached with the strain of stillness. Every instinct urged her to shout, to demand justice louder. But she held her calm, knowing that her composure was its own kind of defiance. Then, from Naomi's phone, a notification popped across the top of the screen. A verified account had joined the live stream. The name made Naomi's breath catch. "Amma," she whispered urgently, "that's Dad's company account. They're watching." Amara's stomach dropped. Their father's CEO of one of the most powerful corporations in the country was seeing this in real time. Every humiliation, every accusation, every threat of arrest. Her cheeks flushed with a mix of shame and relief. "He's going to know," Amara whispered, her throat tight. "He's going to see all of it." The live stream counter soared 55,308. The comments exploded. "Her dad is watching. This is about to get serious. They picked the wrong family." Naomi's grip on her phone steadied. For the first time, she felt something like safety. If their father was watching, they were not alone. They never had been, but now the proof was undeniable. Clara's face twisted as the realization seemed to dawn on her, too. She glanced at Margaret, panic flickering in her eyes. "We need to shut this down. Now." But it was too late. The truth was already free, carried across the world on a stream of pixels and voices. Amara turned her gaze back to Monroe. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "Lieutenant, you can threaten us. You can try to remove us. But you cannot hide what's happening here. Not anymore." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of fear, of defiance, of the shifting tide of justice that had begun to turn against those who had abused their power. Naomi's live stream counter blinked once more. 62,417. The storm had broken, and it was only just beginning. The atmosphere in the cabin had shifted again, though not toward calm. It felt heavier, as though the air itself was aware that something far bigger than a flight delay was unfolding. Every passenger could sense it. Even the hum of the engine seemed muted, as if the plane itself was waiting. Naomi's phone buzzed against her palm with an intensity that nearly made her drop it. Notifications piled in one after another, messages from strangers, mentions from reporters, reposts from accounts she had only seen on television. Her live stream counter blinked 70,842. Amara glanced at the glowing screen, her heart tightening. It was no longer just a stream. It was a movement. She could feel it in the way people looked at them, no longer with quiet curiosity, but with solidarity. But the most jarring notification was the one Naomi had whispered earlier. Their father's company account was watching. That single fact altered everything. For years, their father, Gregory Johnson, had been both protector and teacher, a man who carried power not with arrogance, but with quiet certainty. He had always warned his daughters that the world could be unkind, that their skin could mark them as less in the eyes of those unwilling to see truth. And now he was watching, powerless to shield them from this humiliation, but fully able to wield his influence beyond the cabin walls. Naomi leaned closer to Amara, her voice low, trembling with both fear and hope. Dad's going to call someone. I know he is." Amara's lips pressed together. She nodded faintly, but inside her thoughts tumbled. Do I want him to? Will that make us look like we're only worth protecting because of who he is? Or is this the only way to stop them before it gets worse? Her chest ached with the weight of those questions. "At the front," Clara whispered harshly to Margaret, her face pale. "This is out of hand." "If corporate finds out," Margaret cut her off, her voice clipped and cold. "Corporate won't know if we control it now." But her eyes betrayed her fear. She had seen what passengers were recording. She had heard Sophia say the story was already in the hands of the media. And deep down, Margaret knew there was no controlling it anymore. Lieutenant Monroe's radio crackled again, this time louder, urgent. He turned slightly, pressing the device closer to his ear. The voice on the other end was sharp, authoritative. "Lieutenant, hold position. Do not escalate. Repeat, do not escalate. This has reached upper management. Await further instructions." Monroe's face stiffened. The order was clear. He no longer held the reins of this situation. Someone higher had stepped in. He lowered his hands slowly from his belt, though the tension in his posture did not ease. Naomi's livestream caught every second. Viewers noticed. Comments scrolled. They told him to stand down. Management is panicking. This is bigger than him now. Victor Chen leaned across the aisle, his voice carrying enough for others to hear. "They're scrambling. You can see it in their faces. This is going to blow wide open." Judge Briggs adjusted her glasses, her tone calm but edged with certainty. "Good. Let the truth force their hand. Let it reach every ear that once turned away." Amara drew in a shaky breath. The truth was forcing its way outward, but the spotlight made her feel exposed in ways she hadn't imagined. Her mind raced with doubts. What if this ruins Dad's reputation? What if people say we only stood our ground because of his influence? What if they twist the story? But then she remembered Naomi's trembling hands holding the phone, the comments of thousands urging them on, the voices of passengers who refused to be silent. This was no longer just about them. It was about everyone who had been silenced before. At that same moment, inside a corner office across the city, Gregory Johnson sat at his desk, the live stream open on his monitor. His jaw clenched as he watched his daughters stand firm, watched strangers attempt to strip them of dignity, watched officers threaten them with arrest. He reached for his phone with steady hands, dialing a number that bypassed middle management entirely. "This is Gregory Johnson," he said when the airline's corporate line answered. His voice was low, but carried an edge of steel. "My daughters are on Flight 227. I suggest you connect me to your CEO immediately." Back in the cabin, Margaret's phone buzzed against her hip. She pulled it free, her eyes flicking over the caller ID, her face drained of color. With trembling fingers, she answered softly, stepping a pace aside. "Yes, sir. Yes, I understand." Her voice quivered as she listened, her eyes darting nervously toward the sisters. Passengers around her noticed. Murmurs rose. Sophia whispered to the woman next to her. "She's getting chewed out right now." Naomi's livestream captured Margaret's expression in perfect clarity. Viewers reacted instantly. "She's panicking. They know they messed up. This is history happening live." Amara's heart raced. She could feel the tide shifting in real time. Authority figures who once spoke with certainty now faltered under scrutiny. The narrative they had tried to force that she and Naomi were liars, trespassers, was unraveling thread by thread. Clara stepped back, her composure cracking further. She whispered harshly, "Margaret, what are they saying?" Margaret didn't answer. She simply held the phone tighter, nodding as though her career hung by a thread. Naomi whispered to Amara, her voice tight with relief. "It's Dad. He's behind this. They can't ignore him." But Amara felt a pang of unease even in her gratitude. "Do we need his power to be treated fairly? What about all the people who don't have someone like him?" Her heart twisted. She hated that thought. She hated that justice might only arrive when power demanded it. The cabin door opened once more, and a man in a sleek suit stepped inside. He was not crew, nor security. His badge identified him as Regional Director of Operations. His face was tense, professional, but his tone carried authority beyond Monroe's or Margaret's. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said clearly, his voice projecting to the entire cabin. "This flight will remain grounded until this matter is resolved. We are reviewing all boarding records immediately." The announcement rippled through the cabin. Passengers clapped. Some cheered. Phones captured every word. Naomi's live stream surged past 80,000 viewers. Amara sat back slightly, her pulse still racing, but a faint sense of vindication touching the edges of her fear. For the first time, someone in authority had acknowledged that the truth mattered. Yet she knew the fight was far from over. Trust lost is not so easily returned. And the scars of humiliation, even when healed publicly, still cut deep in private. She pressed her hands together, whispering a thought only Naomi could hear. "No matter what happens, we stood our ground." Naomi nodded, squeezing her sister's hand tight. Her live stream counter blinked again, 85,473. The world was watching, and the world would not look away. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, as if the aircraft itself understood that something monumental was unfolding within its walls. Hours were slipping by. Though the plane hadn't moved an inch, the passengers grew restless, yet none dared to leave their seats, afraid they might miss the next turn of events. Naomi's phone buzzed like a hive in her hand. The livestream counter surged again, 92,103. The screen glowed with messages from strangers around the globe. Some offered prayers, others threats against the airline, others words of empowerment. "You're making history. We're with you all the way. This airline is done." Naomi glanced at Amara with wide eyes. "Amma, there are almost 100,000 people watching right now." Amara's chest tightened. The number terrified her more than it reassured her. She had wanted dignity, fairness, not to be turned into a spectacle. But maybe this was the only way the world listened. She closed her eyes for a moment, whispering to herself, "Stay steady, stay strong." At the front of the cabin, the Regional Director of Operations, a man named Douglas Keene, adjusted his tie and spoke softly into a phone pressed against his ear. His words were clipped, professional, but his eyes revealed the pressure weighing on him. "Yes, we're grounded. No, we can't deplane yet. The optics are disastrous. I understand. I'm handling it." Claire and Margaret stood near him, both visibly shaken. Clara's arms crossed tight against her chest, her bravado long gone. Margaret's face was pale, lips pressed thin. Their whispered exchanges carried the sound of desperation. Lieutenant Monroe remained standing in the aisle, hands behind his back, expression rigid. But his earlier confidence had ebbed. The order from dispatch still rang in his ears, "Stand down." He had lost control of the situation, and the presence of the regional director only deepened the sting. Passengers murmured among themselves. Some speculated about lawsuits, others about news coverage. A man near the back muttered, "This will be on every channel by morning." A woman beside him whispered, "It already is." Victor Chen tapped his phone screen, then looked up. "Confirmed," he said clearly enough for all to hear. "CNN and MSNBC are running the live stream. Twitter's exploding. It's international now." The words set the cabin ablaze with murmurs. Naomi's counter blinked channel 237. Judge Briggs nodded solemnly. "Good. The truth cannot be silenced now." Amara shifted in her seat, her thoughts racing. Truth. Yes. But whose truth will they see us as brave? Or as privileged daughters shielded by their father's power? Will people twist this into something ugly? Her heart ached with the uncertainty. Then Margaret's voice cut through the tension. She lowered her phone, her face tight with dread. "Corporate wants this resolved immediately," she muttered. "They want the boarding records checked." Clara's eyes widened. "But the system—" "Enough!" Margaret snapped, her veneer of authority cracking. "We can't hide behind excuses anymore. This is out of our hands." Passengers cheered. Phones tilted higher to capture every word. Naomi's live stream counter surged again, 111.76. Douglas Keene gestured toward the gate agent who had boarded moments earlier with a laptop. "Pull up the manifest. Verify every detail, now." The agent's hand shook as she balanced the laptop on a service tray. She typed furiously, the sound of keys clacking echoing through the silence of the cabin. All eyes were fixed on her screen. Naomi angled her phone discreetly, capturing the moment for the live stream. Comments exploded. "They're checking. Here comes the truth. This is the nail in the coffin." Amara's pulse raced. Her throat felt dry, her body tense. Every fiber of her being longed for the vindication that was so close. Yet fear gnawed at her fear that even undeniable proof might somehow be twisted, ignored, discarded. The agent scrolled through the passenger list, her eyes scanning quickly. Her lips moved silently as she read. Then she froze. "Seats 2A and 2B," she said softly. "Reserved for Amara Johnson and Naomi Johnson. Checked in, boarded, confirmed." The cabin erupted. Applause thundered. Cheers rose. Voices shouted triumphantly. Some passengers stood, clapping, whistling, celebrating the vindication. Naomi's counter flashed 121. The comments poured in. "Vindicated." "They tried to lie, but the receipts are here. Justice for Amara and Naomi." Amara's eyes filled with tears. Relief surged through her, hot and overwhelming, loosening the tight grip of fear she had carried since the confrontation began. She reached for Naomi's hand, squeezing it tightly. "We're not crazy. We were right all along." Naomi's tears streamed openly as she whispered, "The whole world knows it now." But not everyone in the cabin celebrated. Clara's face twisted in disbelief, shaking her head. No, this isn't possible. They must have tampered with it." Margaret's voice snapped, harsh and trembling. "Enough. Clara, it's over. They were right. We were wrong." Her admission silenced Clara, though the fury in her eyes remained unquenched. Lieutenant Monroe's face was stone, but his silence revealed the truth. He could no longer justify his presence. Slowly, he stepped back, the weight of defeat heavy in his posture. Officer Brooks followed suit, both men withdrawing to the front, stripped of authority by the very truth they had once resisted. Douglas Keene cleared his throat, raising his voice above the noise. "Ladies and gentlemen, I extend our deepest apologies on behalf of the airline. This should never have happened." His words were met with a mix of cheers and jeers. Some passengers shouted, "Too late." Others booed. A few clapped politely, but the overwhelming response was anger at the delay, at the humiliation witnessed, at the incompetence laid bare. Amara's relief was tempered by bitterness. She turned to Naomi, her voice quiet but edged. They only admit it when the world forces them to. Naomi nodded, wiping her tears, but at least they admitted it. Her livestream counter blinked again, 128, 405. The comments were relentless. They better compensate you. Lawsuit incoming. Shut this airline down. Amara felt the flood of support, but also the sting of a deeper truth. What about those who never get live-streamed, who never have proof, who never have a father with power to intervene? Her mind swirled with anger and sorrow. She wanted justice, but not just for herself. She wanted it for all the voices silenced in shadows, for all the stories that never trended, for all the passengers who were told to move quietly and accept injustice. Douglas Keene's phone buzzed again. He glanced at it, his face tightening. Then he addressed the cabin once more. The CEO of this airline will issue a public statement within the hour. This matter has been escalated to the highest level. The announcement set off another wave of murmurs. Passengers whispered, speculated, recorded. Naomi's counter surged past 135 wharf. The plane remained grounded, yet the story soared higher and higher beyond its walls. Amara sat back against her seat, exhausted but unbroken. She looked at Naomi, who was still streaming despite her trembling hands. Together, they had endured humiliation, fear, and rage, and together, they had forced the truth into the light. But as Amara stared at the ceiling of the cabin, one thought pressed harder than all the others. If justice only comes when the world is watching, what happens when the cameras turn away? The question lodged itself in her chest, heavy and unresolved, even as the applause still echoed around her. Naomi's livestream counter blinked again, 142,379. The storm raged on, and they were at its eye. The cabin buzzed with a restless electricity. Passengers shifted in their seats, whispering urgently, their voices overlapping in a chorus of anticipation. Though the plane remained parked at the gate, no one dared to leave. It wasn't just a flight anymore, it was a stage, and the world was watching. Naomi's phone quivered in her hand. The livestream counter now flashed a number so staggering she almost couldn't comprehend it. 153,111. The scrolling comments flew by too quickly to read, but certain phrases stood out in bold clarity. Press conference starting CEO statement live. Turn on the feed. Naomi's breath caught. She looked at Amara with wide, unblinking eyes. Ama, they're going live right now. Amara swallowed hard. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She had spent hours fighting quietly, determined to keep her calm against the storm of injustice. But now the highest power in the airline, the very top, was about to speak. And with that came the weight of vindication, or betrayal. At the front of the cabin, Douglas Keene adjusted his tie, his phone screen casting a bluish glow across his stern features. He held it up for everyone to hear. Attention passengers. The CEO is addressing this matter publicly at this very moment. A hush fell over the plane. Even Monroe and Brooks, who had kept their stoic positions, leaned slightly closer. Clara shifted uncomfortably, wringing her hands. Margaret stared at the floor, her lips pressed so tightly together they turned pale. From Keene's phone, the voice of the CEO rang out, firm yet laced with an unfamiliar tremor. Good evening. This is Alan Price, Chief Executive Officer of Skyreach Airlines. Tonight, I address you not as an executive, but as a human being who has seen the pain, fear, and humiliation inflicted on two of our passengers, Amara and Naomi Johnson. The mention of their names rippled through the cabin. Dozens of eyes turned to the sisters. Amara's face flushed hot, her body stiffening under the sudden spotlight. Naomi gripped her hand tightly, whispering, "We're right here, Ama. He's talking about us." On the live stream, comments exploded. They said their names. This is history. No turning back now. The CEO continued, "What occurred aboard Flight 227 is unacceptable. It is a failure not only of protocol, but of humanity. Discrimination has no place in our airline, nor in our society. I have spoken personally with the Johnson family, and I extend my sincerest apologies to Amara and Naomi. They deserved respect and dignity, not suspicion and threats." The cabin gasped collectively. Judge Briggs nodded approvingly, her voice steady. Finally, accountability. Victor Chen clapped once, sharply, breaking the silence. Soon others joined, hesitant at first, then louder, until applause filled the air. Yet not everyone clapped. Clara's face contorted with anger, her eyes darting around as though searching for an escape hatch. Amara sat frozen. Her heart raced, her mind spinning. She had longed for vindication, but the sound of her own name on the lips of a powerful CEO felt surreal, overwhelming, even alienating. She whispered softly, "Why does it take a CEO's voice for people to believe us?" Naomi squeezed her hand again, her eyes shining with tears. "Because the world listens when power speaks. But at least they're listening." The CEO's voice pressed on. "Effective immediately. The staff members responsible for this incident have been placed on suspension pending a full investigation. Lieutenant Monroe and Officer Brooks will also face review for their handling of this situation." Monroe's face hardened, his jaw flexing, but he remained silent. Brooks shifted uncomfortably, his eyes dropping to the floor. The passengers erupted again, this time with louder cheers and shouts of approval. Phones rose higher, capturing every second. Naomi's live stream counter blinked 165:0092. The CEO concluded, his voice steady now, carrying the weight of a promise. Skyreach Airlines will not rest until trust is rebuilt. To Amara and Naomi, and to every passenger watching tonight, I pledge this change is coming. Thank you. The feed ended. For a long moment, silence filled the cabin. The words still hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Then applause broke out, thunderous and unrestrained. Strangers turned to Amara and Naomi, offering smiles, nods, even whispered apologies. Sofia Martinez leaned forward, her voice warm. "You did this. You stood your ground, and you forced them to face it." Naomi's tears spilled over, her shoulders shaking. She whispered to her sister, "We weren't alone. We never were." Amara nodded faintly, though her expression remained conflicted. Relief mixed with anger inside her chest. Yes, they apologized. Yes, the world saw. But how many others never got this chance? How many were silenced before a camera could be turned on? Her thoughts churned. She wanted to celebrate, to let the weight lift from her heart. But the scars of humiliation didn't vanish with a corporate apology. They lingered, etched deeper than words could heal. Douglas Keene cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, we thank you for your patience. We are preparing to resume boarding and complete this flight." Groans echoed through the cabin. Some passengers looked relieved, others frustrated. The idea of flying after such chaos seemed absurd, yet few wanted to abandon the moment. Victor Chen stood once more, his voice ringing. "Before we take off, let's acknowledge something. This is bigger than just one flight. What happened here will set precedent. We have to keep telling the story." Judge Briggs tapped her cane firmly against the floor. Indeed, justice is not a statement, it is a practice, and it must continue long after this plane lands. Naomi's live stream captured it all. Her counter ticked upwards still, 172,309. Clara, trembling with fury, hissed under her breath, "This isn't fair. They ruined us." Margaret, her shoulders slumped in defeat, whispered back, "We ruined ourselves." Amara closed her eyes, drawing in a steady breath. The cabin's noise swirled around her, but inside her mind, a quieter storm raged. Yes, they admitted fault. Yes, they suspended those responsible. But what happens tomorrow, next week, next month? The applause, the cheers, the CEO's promises, they all mattered. But for Amara, the deeper question was whether the world would remember once the camera stopped rolling. Naomi leaned close, whispering, "Amma, you were incredible. You never lost your calm. Even when I wanted to scream, you held us together." Amara's lips curved into the faintest smile. "We held each other together." The sisters embraced briefly, their bond unshaken, their resolve only stronger. The plane remained still, but in that cabin, history had moved. The story was no longer confined to rows and seats. It had broken free, soaring into homes, screens, hearts across the world. And though Amara could not shake her doubts, she knew one truth had already taken root. Silence had been shattered. Naomi's live stream counter blinked one last time before she lowered the phone to her lap. 180-1. The world was watching, and it would not forget so easily. The echoes of the CEO's voice still lingered in the cabin, mingled with the memory of thunderous applause. For a few minutes the atmosphere had felt almost celebratory, as if the entire plane had exhaled a long breath of relief. But relief, Amara realized, was fragile. The truth had come out. Apologies had been spoken, yet the tension refused to dissolve completely. Naomi sat back in her seat, the phone finally resting on her lap. Her eyes were swollen from tears, her shoulders trembling with the aftershocks of adrenaline. She whispered, more to herself than to her sister, "It's over. It has to be over." Amara glanced at her, then toward the rows of passengers still buzzing with conversation. "For us, maybe, but not for everyone," she murmured. Her voice was steady, but her heart was still a battlefield. She wanted to believe Naomi's words, but deep inside she knew the struggle didn't end with a press conference. It only shifted. Douglas Keene moved down the aisle, his presence commanding attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are preparing to resume the flight. Please remain seated. We appreciate your patience." His tone was clipped, weary. He looked like a man carrying the weight of an entire corporation on his shoulders. Passengers muttered in response. Some grumbled about the delay. Others muttered about lawsuits. A few clapped sarcastically. Then, from the middle of the cabin, a sharp voice cut through the chatter. "This is ridiculous." Everyone turned toward the source. A man in his 40s, dressed in a rumpled business suit, stood up abruptly. His face was flushed red, veins visible at his temple. "We've been sitting here for hours. All because of them." His finger jabbed toward Amara and Naomi. Naomi stiffened instantly, clutching her sister's hand. Amara turned her head slowly, her gaze locking onto the man. His eyes were bloodshot, his body trembling with anger that had been simmering quietly until it erupted now. Victor Chen rose to his feet immediately, his voice firm. "Sit down. They didn't cause this. Injustice did." But the man barked back. "Don't tell me what to do. I've missed my meetings, my clients, my entire schedule destroyed because these girls wanted to make a scene. A collective gasp rippled through the passengers. Naomi's lips parted in shock, her heart sinking. Her livestream was still running silently. Camera angled low, but it caught every word. Judge Briggs's cane tapped sharply against the floor. Her voice, though frail, carried like a gavel striking wood. You will not blame them for standing up for their dignity. If this inconvenience is the worst you face, count yourself fortunate. The man scoffed, his arms flailing. Fortunate I'm losing money. My company's collapsing. And for what? Because 2 kids decided they were victims. Maybe they should have just moved. Naomi flinched at the word. Victims. The way he spat it, as though it were a choice, as though their pain were performative. Her throat tightened. Amara, however, drew in a slow breath. She rose from her seat with deliberate calm, her posture tall and composed. The plane quieted instantly. Even the angry man froze under her gaze. Her voice was low but steady. You think we wanted this? You think we asked to be humiliated in front of 100 people, threatened with arrest, stripped of our dignity? We didn't choose this. It was forced on us the moment someone decided our skin made us suspicious. Her words carried the weight of every restrained tear, every clenched fist, every moment of silence endured through years of quiet endurance. The cabin held its breath. The man sneered, his bravado faltering but not gone. All I'm saying is the rest of us shouldn't have to suffer for your fight. Victor stepped closer, his voice firm. Their fight is all of ours. If you can't see that, then maybe you're part of the problem. Applause erupted again, louder this time, aimed not at the CEO's distant words, but at Amara's strength. Strangers leaned forward, clapping, nodding, calling out in support. The man's face reddened further. He looked around, realizing he was outnumbered, his anger unwelcome. With a muttered curse, he dropped back into his seat, arms crossed like a sulking child. Naomi exhaled shakily, her grip on Amara's hand tightening. She whispered, Amma, you didn't just shut him down. You spoke for all of us. Amara sat back down slowly, her body trembling with the aftershock of standing against another storm. Inside, though, her thoughts twisted painfully. How many more will there be like him? How many more voices will tell us to sit down, to stay quiet, to stop making trouble? Her chest ached with the weight of that question. She knew the answer. Too many. Douglas Keene, visibly unsettled by the confrontation, cleared his throat. Let's maintain composure. Everyone, we are arranging departure shortly. But the moment had already left its mark. The cabin was no longer united in relief. The eruption had exposed the fault lines that still ran beneath the surface. Some passengers cheered for the sisters, while others muttered discontent under their breath, unwilling to let go of resentment. Naomi looked at her phone. The counter blinked 191:04. The argument had spread through the livestream, igniting new waves of comments. Speak truth, Amara. That man is proof this isn't over. This story matters even more now. Amara glanced at the screen, her heart sinking deeper. The spotlight was relentless. It magnified their pain, their courage, their every word, and though it carried justice outward, it also left them bare, vulnerable to scrutiny and criticism that would never fade. Naomi leaned against her sister's shoulder, whispering with exhaustion, I just want to go home. Amara pressed her cheek against Naomi's hair, her voice tender. We'll get there, but even when we do, we won't be the same. The truth of her words settled heavily between them. The cabin's lights hummed softly. Passengers murmured. Attendants shuffled nervously. The engines rumbled faintly, signaling preparation for takeoff. Yet the sisters knew the journey ahead was more than miles in the sky. For Amara, the confrontation with the businessman revealed something sharp and undeniable. The fight for dignity wasn't a moment, wasn't solved by an apology or a statement. It was ongoing, persistent, exhausting, and she would have to carry it, not just for herself and Naomi, but for all who couldn't speak. She closed her eyes briefly, whispering silently to herself, "Stay strong, stay steady. Even when the applause fades, stay steady." Naomi's livestream counter blinked again. 202. The world was still watching, and Amara knew, with painful clarity, that their story had only just begun. At last, after hours of waiting, the cabin shuddered with the deep rumble of engines. The announcement came over the speakers, firm but almost weary. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've been cleared for departure. Please fasten your seatbelts." A ripple of relief passed through the passengers. For many, the ordeal had lasted long enough they just wanted to move, to feel the closure of wheels leaving the ground. For others, including Amara, the sound of the engines wasn't reassurance. It was a reminder that though the plane could take off, the weight inside her chest would remain grounded. Naomi leaned her head against the window, her phone still in her lap. The livestream had ended minutes ago. After 7 continuous hours, her battery was nearly dead. Her fingers cramped from holding the device steady. Yet the silence that followed its end felt strange, almost empty. "How many watched by the end?" Amara asked softly. Naomi's eyes fluttered open. 212,000, she whispered, her voice hoarse. "It's everywhere now. We're everywhere now." Amara turned her gaze forward, her expression unreadable. Part of her wanted to take comfort in the visibility, in the undeniable proof that their truth had reached so many. But another part of her recoiled from it, unsettled by the permanence of being seen. The plane jerked as it began to taxi. A nervous laugh rippled through the cabin. Passengers shifted in their seats, tugged at seatbelts, adjusted bags. Victor Chen leaned over the aisle, speaking to Judge Briggs in a low voice about the legal implications. Sofia Martinez closed her eyes, whispering a quiet prayer under her breath. Clara sat stiffly near the front, her face blank, her body hunched forward. Margaret hadn't spoken in over an hour. Monroe and Brooks sat together, both silent, their posture rigid. The storm of accountability swirled around them, but they seemed frozen, unwilling or unable to move forward. Amara watched them briefly, then closed her eyes as the plane lurched again. Her mind drifted back to her mother's words from years ago. "Strength doesn't always roar. Amara, sometimes strength is steady breathing when the world tries to suffocate you." The engines roared louder. The plane gathered speed, hurtling down the runway, until suddenly the earth fell away beneath them. Cheers and sighs filled the cabin as they lifted into the air. For the first time all day, they were in motion. Naomi clutched Amara's hand tightly during ascent. When the plane leveled out, she let out a shaky laugh. "We made it? Finally! We're flying?" Amara nodded faintly, her eyes fixed on the patchwork of city lights below. "Yes, but flying doesn't mean free." Her words lingered, heavy with unspoken truth. The cabin lights dimmed, casting a softer glow across tired faces. Some passengers closed their eyes, eager for rest. Others whispered, decompressing the chaos into hurried conversations. The businessman who had lashed out earlier sat with arms crossed, staring angrily at the seat back in front of him. His bitterness radiated like static in the air. The sisters sat in silence for a while. Naomi tapped absently at her phone, though service had cut off. Amara's gaze stayed fixed on the window, her reflection staring back at her in the glass. Finally, Naomi broke the quiet. "Do you think this changes anything? Really changes it?" Amara took a long breath before answering. "Maybe it changes the story. Maybe it makes some people think. But does it change the next gate agent who looks at us with suspicion? The next officer who assumes we don't belong? The next stranger who calls us troublemakers?" Naomi frowned, her voice tinged with frustration. "So what, Amma? We just keep fighting forever." "Yes," Amara said softly, "because we don't get to stop. Not if we want the ones who come after us to face less than we did." Naomi's lips trembled. She turned away, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. Amara felt her sister's exhaustion like it was her own. The plane jolted suddenly, rattling cups and overhead bins. Gas spread through the cabin. The captain's voice came calmly over the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've hit some turbulence. Please remain seated with seatbelts fastened." The cabin quieted instantly. Outside the windows, the night sky swallowed the plane, clouds shifting like shadows. The aircraft dipped slightly, then steadied, then dipped again. The turbulence wasn't violent, but it was persistent just enough to keep every passenger aware of their vulnerability. Amara felt Naomi's hand grip hers again. She squeezed back, steady, calm, inside, though she recognized the symbolism too clearly. The storm wasn't over, not in the air, not in life. Smooth skies were always temporary. Across the aisle, Victor spoke again, his voice rising above the hum of engines. "You know, turbulence is like truth. It shakes you, unsettles you, makes you uncomfortable. But it also reminds you you're alive. It reminds you you're moving forward." Several passengers chuckled nervously. Judge Briggs nodded in agreement, her face serene. But the businessman snapped again. "Or maybe it's just unnecessary chaos, just like tonight. Some of us don't need reminders, we just need peace and quiet." This time, fewer passengers reacted. His bitterness had worn thin. His voice was a fading echo of the larger storm that had already passed. Naomi leaned closer to Amara, whispering, "Ignore him. He's just noise now." Amara gave a faint smile. "Yes, noise fades. Truth doesn't." Another jolt rocked the cabin. Naomi gasped, burying her face against her sister's shoulder. Amara wrapped her arm around her, whispering reassurance. Her own heart beat steady even as the plane shook. For a long while, no one spoke. The turbulence continued, relentless but survivable. Passengers adjusted, endured, waited, and slowly, the realization settled in Amara's chest. This was what resilience looked like. Not the absence of storms, but the ability to breathe through them, to hold steady while the world shook. Eventually, the turbulence eased. The plane steadied, the engines humming more smoothly. A collective sigh of relief spread through the cabin. Naomi lifted her head, her face pale but calmer. "We're okay," Amara whispered. "We'll always be okay. Because we keep holding on." Naomi nodded slowly, her tears drying, her grip loosening but not releasing. The sisters sat together in silence, gazing out at the endless dark sky. Below, the world stretched unseen. Ahead, the journey was still long. But inside them, something deeper stirred a quiet understanding that their fight had shifted. They weren't just passengers on a plane anymore. They were voices in a storm, steady even when the skies turned violent. And as the plane carried them forward, Amara closed her eyes briefly, whispering to herself once more, "Stay steady." The cabin had settled into a fragile quiet after the turbulence eased. Some passengers dozed restlessly, heads tilted against windows or folded arms. Others sat awake, staring blankly, lost in the whirlwind of events that had defined the night. The hum of the engines provided a constant background, almost soothing compared to the chaos of earlier hours. Naomi's breathing was soft and steady against Amara's shoulder. She had finally slipped into a shallow sleep, her phone tucked safely into the pocket of her hoodie. Amara sat upright, her gaze unfocused, her mind weaving through everything that had transpired: the humiliation, the confrontation, the apology, the applause, the anger that lingered even after. She wondered if the world outside was still talking about them. She wondered if tomorrow would bring change, or if the cycle would begin again with another story, another set of faces forced to endure what they had endured. The thought pressed on her chest like a weight she couldn't shake. A sudden cry shattered the quiet. "Help, somebody help." Gasps and startled voices rose instantly. Flight attendants rushed toward the center of the cabin, where an elderly woman had slumped sideways in her seat, her body limp. Her daughter, seated beside her, clutched her arm desperately, tears streaking her face. "She's not breathing." "Right," the daughter sobbed. "Please, someone do something." The cabin erupted in commotion. Passengers craned their necks. Some stood. Others shouted for assistance. Fear spread quickly, thick and contagious. Douglas Keene's voice rang out, firm and commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen, remain calm. Is there a doctor on board for a moment?" Silence followed. Then, a man in a navy sweater raised his hand from a few rows back. "I'm a cardiologist. Let me through." The aisle cleared as passengers pressed back against their seats. The doctor hurried forward, kneeling beside the elderly woman, checking her pulse, speaking quickly to the attendants. Naomi jolted awake, her eyes wide with alarm. "Amma, what's happening?" "A woman's collapsed," Amara said softly, already rising from her seat. She touched her sister's arm gently. "Stay here. I'll help however I can." Naomi grabbed her wrist. "Amma, no, you've already been through enough tonight. Please." But Amara only gave her a steady look, her voice calm but resolute. "This isn't about me. Someone needs us." She moved into the aisle, weaving through passengers until she reached the small crowd forming around the fallen woman. The cardiologist was giving instructions rapidly. "We need oxygen now. Get the emergency kit." An attendant rushed to retrieve it, but their hands shook visibly, their voices strained with panic. Amara knelt beside them, her tone gentle yet firm. "Breathe. Focus. You've done this before. You know what to do." The attendant blinked, steadied, and nodded. Together, they helped set up the oxygen mask as the cardiologist prepared to administer CPR. The tension in the air was suffocating. Every passenger was silent now, watching, waiting, united in fear. Clara sat rigid in her seat, her face pale. Margaret leaned forward, whispering frantic prayers under her breath. Even the hostile businessman who had cursed them earlier now looked stricken, his anger replaced by a helpless unease. The doctor began chest compressions, his movements quick and precise. 1, 2, 3, 4. He counted under his breath, the rhythm filling the otherwise silent cabin. "Breathe," he commanded, and the attendant lifted the mask over the woman's face, delivering oxygen. Amara steadied the daughter, who sobbed uncontrollably beside them. She wrapped her arm around the woman's shoulders, whispering softly, "She's in good hands. He knows what he's doing. Hold on to hope." The daughter clung to her, tears soaking into Amara's sleeve. Seconds stretched into eternity. The doctor continued compressions, sweat beading his forehead. Then suddenly, the elderly woman coughed weakly, her chest rising. The cabin erupted with gasps of relief. "She's breathing," the doctor confirmed, his voice sharp but relieved. "Keep the oxygen steady. Monitor her closely until we land." Cheers and applause broke out instinctively, filling the cabin with a raw, unfiltered sense of unity. Strangers who had been divided by arguments, resentment, and suspicion only hours ago now found themselves bound by a single shared hope life. Naomi was crying openly now, relief flooding her. She whispered, "Amma, you were right to go. You always know when to step forward." Amara helped guide the daughter back into her seat, keeping her close to her mother. She turned back toward the aisle, her eyes scanning the faces of the passengers. Something had shifted. For the first time that night, Clara's gaze met hers. It was brief, hesitant, but there was no hostility in it, only something quieter acknowledgement, maybe even guilt. Margaret offered a faint nod through her tears. The businessman sat with his head bowed, his hands gripping the seat in front of him. Amara returned to her seat, her body trembling slightly from the intensity of the moment. Naomi leaned into her, whispering, "Even after everything, you keep giving. Doesn't it drain you?" Amara thought about that for a long moment. Her voice, when it came, was soft but clear. "Yes, it does. But giving is what keeps me alive, too. It reminds me I'm more than what they see. It reminds me we're all more—" Naomi's hand slipped into hers, squeezing tightly. The cabin slowly settled again. The elderly woman's breathing steadied under the mask, her daughter whispering words of gratitude over and over. The doctor sat back, finally exhaling, his face weary but relieved. The passengers whispered among themselves, but the whispers were different now. No bitterness, no blame, only awe, only respect, only the raw reminder of how fragile life was and how much they depended on each other, no matter who they were. The plane continued through the night sky, its engines steady, its path unwavering. For the first time since the chaos began, Amara felt a flicker of something warm in her chest. Not relief, not victory, but humanity. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't permanent. But for one fragile hour at 30,000 feet, the storm had quieted, and every person on that plane had remembered what truly mattered. The lights of the city came into view long before the captain announced descent. A glowing patchwork of orange and white sprawled against the darkness, a reminder that the world outside had kept moving while their flight was frozen in time. Inside the cabin, silence had settled again, not heavy like before, but tired, reflective, fragile. Naomi stirred beside Amara, blinking slowly. Her eyes were swollen from tears, her face pale with exhaustion. She looked out the window at the approaching city lights and whispered, "We're almost home." Amara nodded, though her heart was anything but calm. The emergency had shifted the cabin's mood, softening hostility into something gentler. But she knew too well how quickly that unity would dissolve once they landed. The ground below held not only relief, but questions, judgment, cameras, consequences. The captain's voice broke through. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our descent. Please return to your seats, fasten your seat belts, and prepare for landing." Attendants moved down the aisle, their faces still drawn, but steadier now. Clara avoided eye contact. though her steps had lost some of the arrogance they carried hours earlier. Margaret's hand shook faintly as she checked seatbelts. Douglas Keene stood near the front, his shoulders squared, a man preparing for the reckoning waiting outside. The plane dipped, engines roaring, the city grew closer. Naomi clasped Amara's hand, her voice trembling. What if there are cameras? What if the world's out there waiting for us? Amara squeezed gently. Then we face it, together, the same way we faced everything else. The wheels screeched against the runway, jolting the cabin. Gasps. Then applause erupted this time. The applause wasn't for speeches or defiance, but for the simple fact of arrival, of surviving a night unlike any other. As the plane taxied toward the gate, passengers stirred with nervous energy. Bags shifted. Whispers grew. Victor Chen leaned across the aisle, his voice low but firm. Whatever happens out there, remember you're not alone. You've changed more tonight than you realize. Judge Briggs gave a faint smile, her eyes shining. History has a way of noticing moments like these. It will notice you. Naomi's throat tightened. She pressed against Amara's side, whispering, Do you hear them? People believe in us? Amara's gaze stayed fixed forward. Her voice was quiet. Belief is only the beginning. Action is what matters. The plane stopped at the gate. The familiar ding sounded as the seatbelt sign turned off. But no one rushed to stand. Instead, all eyes turned toward the front, where ground crew stood waiting just beyond the door. The windows revealed flashing lights, dozens of them, the unmistakable glare of news cameras. Naomi gasped softly. Ama, it's real. They're here. The first passengers began to disembark, moving slowly, their faces illuminated by the pulsing glow outside. Murmurs filled the cabin as reporters' voices echoed faintly through the thin walls. Questions shouted, microphones raised, cameras flashing, when their row was called. Amara stood slowly, helping Naomi gather her bag. Her hands trembled slightly, though her face remained composed. Naomi's knees wobbled as they moved forward, each step heavier than the last. The door opened. A wave of sound crashed in instantly shouts, questions, cameras clicking in rapid bursts. Amara, Naomi, how did it start? Were you threatened by the crew? Do you believe this was racially motivated? What do you want to say to the world? Naomi froze, her chest rising quickly. Her eyes darted to her sister in panic. Amara stepped in front of her, shielding her from the blinding flashes. She raised her chin, her voice calm but firm. We'll speak, but not here. Not like this. Security ushered them forward, trying to carve a path through the sea of reporters. Passengers followed, some shielding their faces, others pausing to offer the sisters nods or words of encouragement. Victor Chen placed a reassuring hand on Amara's shoulder as he passed. Stay steady. The world will listen when you're ready. Judge Briggs offered a small wave, her cane tapping against the floor as she exited into the glare. Finally, Amara and Naomi stepped into the terminal. The chaos was overwhelming flashes, shouts, microphones thrust forward. But beyond the chaos, beyond the noise, Amara felt something else, a current, a momentum, the undeniable truth that their story had already left this plane, this night, and become something larger. Naomi clung to her sister's hand, whispering frantically, Ama, I can't do this. Amara turned, her eyes soft but steady. You already did. You spoke when you needed to. You stood when it mattered. Tonight wasn't just about enduring, it was about showing the world what dignity looks like when it's tested. Naomi's breath caught. Tears welled in her eyes, but she nodded, her grip tightening. Together, they moved through the crowd, guided by security. Dr. Leonard Johnson waited beyond the barricade, his face a mixture of fury, pride, and deep concern. When he saw his daughters, he rushed forward, pulling them into his arms. "You're safe," he whispered fiercely, holding them close. "You're safe, and I'm here now." Naomi sobbed into his chest. Amara closed her eyes, finally allowing herself to lean into his embrace. Her own tears silent but steady. The cameras captured it all, the reunion, the raw humanity of a father's embrace, the exhaustion etched into the sisters' faces. Reporters shouted questions, but none of them mattered in that moment. What mattered was survival. What mattered was family. What mattered was the unshakable truth that dignity, once defended, could never be erased. Later, statements would be made. Lawsuits would be filed. The airline would be forced to reckon with its choices. But in that moment, as Amara held Naomi's hand and felt her father's arms around them, the noise of the world faded. She whispered to herself, almost too softly to hear, "Stay steady." And for the first time all night, she believed it. And so the plane touched down. But the story didn't end on the runway. What began as a moment of discrimination became a lesson carried by hundreds of passengers, and now by all of us. Amara's strength was not loud. It was quiet, steady, and unbreakable. Naomi's courage wasn't in her live stream alone, but in the way she refused to let the world silence her truth. Together, they showed us that resilience is not about avoiding storms. It's about holding on when the storm is determined to break you. Wow. Yet this story isn't just about two sisters. It's about the choices we all make when injustice unfolds before our eyes. Do we stay silent? Do we look away? Or do we speak, act, and risk discomfort for the sake of dignity and fairness? The cabin that night became a mirror of our society. Prejudice on one side, compassion on the other, and in that fragile space, humanity itself was tested. Let this story remind us that respect is not optional, justice is not negotiable, and silence is never neutrality. If this story moved you, if it made you feel anger, empathy, or hope, help us keep these voices alive. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel. So together, we can shine a light on the stories that matter most.